Haazen, as far as I'm concerned, is certainly one of the more interesting cases of Darksiders within the Star Wars lore. The reason why that is in a way he is a bit of a outcast when compared to the other mainstream Sith. What I mean by this is, if you look at Sith Lords, starting with, say, Darth Vader, Count Dooku, Darth Maul, Darth Revan, Exar Kun, Vitiate, Sidious, these are all individuals who, whether it be that they were Jedi before falling to the Sith, they were all prodigious individuals, meaning they had some great level of skill or natural talent with the Force, or just as learners in general. Now, Haazen, of course, does not fall under that category. Anybody who has read Knights of the Old Republic knows that Haazen, as a Jedi Padawan, certainly was not very competent, and as a result he never achieved knighthood. Yet, even with him being exiled from the Jedi, not being allowed to serve as a Jedi Knight, he still managed to find his own way. And the way he did that was not through the teachings of the Jedi, it was through the teachings of the Sith. And this to me highlights one of the key differences between the Jedi Order and Sith. Whereas the Jedi are collectivists, and being a group of people who value conformity over individualism, Haazen didn't really fit in. He did not conform to their standards. And it may not have necessarily been that he was an incompetent person, because obviously if he managed to succeed with the dark side of the Force, he managed to become a powerful Force user regardless. The point is, it was through the teachings of the Sith, through individualism, through carving his own path, that he was able to become a powerful Force user. The Jedi do not value individualism. For those who may contain different talents, perhaps they don't fit in with the rest of Jedi. For example, Anakin Skywalker had this issue where he was so skilled in the Force, so ahead of his peers, that he was held back, and as a result he was stunted in a way as a Jedi, as he was never allowed to really hone his full abilities in the Force. With Haazen, he had some sort of disability as far as learning by the Jedi's teachings, but this maybe did not translate directly to being incompetent. Like I said, he ultimately does find his way. This really highlights the great difference between the Jedi and Sith Order. Whereas the Sith, individualism allows anybody to obtain their true potential, the Jedi, you can only really do this through being a part of a whole. And ultimately, this metaphorically can transfer to the real world. I've always associated power in the Force to be either power, just knowledge in general, a person who possesses a great amount of knowledge, because ultimately knowledge is power. I always think of entrepreneurs in contrast to higher education, what universities deem to be successful, whereas where an individual-minded person may not find the same success in academia, but they still value knowledge, whereas they hate the institution, but they still value knowledge. Ultimately, these people become great entrepreneurs if you think of great minds like Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, perhaps Elon Musk. All these individuals at some point, if you look up their backgrounds, will state their opinions in higher education and why it doesn't translate to success, and why they certainly, when hiring employees, do not look at a college degree as a sure sign of success, because all these people had issues with higher education. And that didn't necessarily make them failures if they dropped out. I mean, all these individuals are billionaires and hold a lot more power than any one person has in academia. The significance of the story of Haazen is to highlight the contrast between individualism as it pertains to the Sith versus collectivism as it pertains to the Jedi, and how the Sith ideology allows any individual, provided that they are strong enough, to achieve their full potential as Haazen ultimately did. In addition to this, I'd like to point out that yes, Haazen relied heavily on Sith artifacts to bolster his abilities. However, I don't think this is a cheating method by any means. The artifacts he used, the Jedi simply refused to incorporate, or they saw them as being dangerous, maybe because they were unable to handle the sheer power of these artifacts. Whereas a Darksider like Haazen saw how these artifacts contained potential, were relics of the old Sith, and ultimately could be used for one's personal gain. And again, this highlights the difference between the Jedi and Sith. And if I could, I'd probably also add that Haazen relying on these artifacts, well, first off, I'd probably compare artifacts in Star Wars to just information or sources of information in the current modern day age. That could be any book from a library, that could just be the internet, any resources you'll find on there. To me, those are analogous to artifacts in the Star Wars universe, meaning that these are old sources of information. If you're talking about a publication, a research paper, these are sources of information that are out there for you to learn from and gain power through. Now, the artifacts in Star Wars, they're not exactly the same in that they increase one's level of competency in the Force. And going off on another tangent, I'd probably also go on to compare one's potential in the Force in Star Wars, meaning midi-chlorian count and how that translates to greater potential in the Force. I'd probably compare that to intelligence or IQ, or one's just natural aptitude for learning. Let's say a weak Force user like Haazen was able to bolster his ability in the Force by using these artifacts that have been created by previous Sith. Right? He's not reinventing the wheel here. He doesn't need to use his own abilities to find out new eccentric Sith rituals to create these new artifacts. He doesn't need to do that. If he's resourceful enough, he'll go back and use these artifacts like he did. Likewise, somebody in real life who may not be the smartest person in terms of IQ, maybe just your average Joe, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to have issues competing with bright minds, assuming that they are resourceful enough to utilize information from previous generations. And like I said, that could just be books, publication papers, research papers, any source of information that's just going to add to your pool of knowledge, that you now have a comparative advantage to the really smart person who maybe doesn't feel the need to go out of their way and rely on other resources. Eventually, they will be overthrown, and that's ultimately what happened with Haazen, where he was able to outfight Lucian, Dre, as well as the other Jedi who tried to raid him. To me, Haazen's significant because he is an outlier when compared to the traditional Sith Lord, whether that be Vader with his potential as Anakin Skywalker, being the chosen one, whether that be Count Dooku being a gifted prodigy as a Jedi, whether that be Darth Revan, Exar Kun. These are all students who, during their time as Jedi, were incredibly gifted, and that translated to their success as Sith Lords. Haazen was not one of them. He was a failed Jedi, yet he found great success as a Sith because he embraced the core ideology of embracing individualism and pursuing your own way, going down the path that best fits you, not going by the one-size-fits-all mythology of the Jedi, which ultimately failed Haazen. And like I said, the story of Haazen can be applied to the modern-day era. Just look at entrepreneurs, look at individual minds going on their own way, outperforming the masses who are a part of collectivism. And I hope you can learn from the story of Haazen and apply that to your personal life as you go on to succeed.